Hey there. So I'm really excited for you to take this diagnostic and get a ton of value from the 9-page report and the 15-minute audio analysis that'll follow. But before we get there, we want to make sure that you take the diagnostic as accurately as possible. So let me point out a couple of general tips as well as some more specifics. So first off, you want to make sure that you take the diagnostic after sleeping a good 8 to 9 hours. You don't have to sleep early necessarily, but we want to make sure you get 8 to 9 hours of sleep. And then when you wake up, you have a solid breakfast, nothing too filling that's going to make you lethargic and fall asleep halfway through the test, but something that makes it so that your stomach's not grumbling as you progress. And then we want to make sure that when you take it, you're going to do it in 1 3.5-hour sitting, including the 2 5-minute breaks. So let's go ahead and look a little bit more closely at the time constraints. So when you go to page 2, you'll notice that there's 8 sections to the diagnostic, and it basically alternates between ACT and SAT, and it's abbreviated versions of each of these sections. So that way, in that 3.5-hour time period, you're essentially getting a full SAT under your belt and a full ACT, but it's abbreviated versions of each. For the 2 5-minute breaks, notice the first 5-minute break occurs after completing the first 3 sections, the second 5-minute break occurs after completing the next 3 sections, and then you finish out sections 7 and 8, and then you're done for the day. On 2 of these 8 sections, you're permitted to use your graphing calculator. On the 3rd section, which is the ACT math, you get to use it on the entire section. Now for SAT, there's a math with calculator section and a math non-calculator section. So the 6th section, the SAT math non-calculator, you're not allowed to use your graphing calculator, whereas on section 7, the SAT math with calculator, you can use your graphing calculator. On page 3, you'll see some details about some information, the most important of which is that it's to your advantage to answer every question, even if you have to guess. So keep that in mind. You want to treat it as much like you would the real test to really simulate testing conditions. If you purchased a physical copy of the diagnostic, please rip out these 4 scantron documents through the perforated edges on the left side. As far as the scantron documents, for this first scantron, I really just want your first and last name. You don't have to worry about bubbling in, but I do want the email addresses for both the student and the parent. That way I can provide both of you with the 9-page report, the audio analysis, and all the details that follow. The most important documents are the next 3. The scantron that has sections 1 through 3, the scantron with sections 4 through 6, and the scantron with sections 7 and 8. And then we get into the actual test. So you'll notice at the top of each section, it'll tell you what time restraint you have there. So regardless what phone you have, if you're going to use that for your timer, I would recommend you have your phone in airplane mode, and then I would actually set the timer for 5 minutes less than the time that you're permitted. So for example, on the ACT English test, the first section of the diagnostic, it says 24 minutes. So I would recommend you set your timer for 19 minutes, and then once it goes off, you can go ahead and pause for a moment and then reset it to 5 minutes, because essentially that would be like giving you the 5-minute warning that the proctor would give you during the actual test. If your parent can help you with that, great, but if not, that's a great workaround so that you can do it independently. The same will be true for each of the remaining sections of the diagnostic. It gives you the time at the top. I would set my timer for 5 minutes less to get that 5-minute warning. Notice that on the SAT math sections, you'll be given certain formulas that you can reference throughout the section. And then notice these details for the gridded response questions specific to the SAT math with calculator as well as the SAT math non-calculator sections. So a couple tips here. First, you're only graded on the actual bubbling portion, but it is recommended that you still write in your answer at the top as well. Also, make sure you only mark 1 circle for each column. If you double mark, and any multiple choice question for that matter, you're going to leave it as invalid. The third tip is that you'll never get a negative answer. So if you end up getting a negative, you know something went wrong and you'll go recheck your work. If nothing else, I just would grid it in without the negative and hope that that was your only mistake. But definitely don't grid in the negative, because then you're going to get it wrong for sure. Something that can be a little bit confusing is you can actually have more than 1 correct answer on a particular question, but you only have to grid in 1 of those correct answers. I've seen questions on the SAT where there's actually up to 6 correct answers and you just pick 1 of them. Now, mixed numbers like 3.5 have to be gridded as either 3.5, so the decimal equivalent, or 7 halves, which is the improper fraction. If you grid it the way that it's shown here, SAT will interpret it as 31 halves instead of 3.5. If your answer is a decimal, you have a couple of options of how you could grid it. You could do it as the fraction equivalent, for example, 2/3. And then for the decimal equivalent, you could either truncate it, which means just totally dropping off the rest of the decimal, so like 0.666 and just leaving it at that, or you could round the last digit so that it's 0.667. As far as indentation is concerned, you can actually start in any space you want. So for example, 201 could be displayed in either of these 2 ways. Something I want you to do when you finish the 8th and final section, the ACT Science, is somewhere below in this area. I just want you to write either ACT or SAT. based on which test you think you scored higher on. I'm always curious to see whether what the student thinks they scored higher on ends up being the actual outcome. When you're done, no need to grade it or do anything on your end. Just immediately either take pictures of or scan these 4 documents. This one with your name and email addresses, the scantron with sections 1 through 3, the scantron with 4 through 6, and the scantron with sections 7 and 8. Send them to me at tom@zaratutoring.com, and within 24 hours, I'll generate the 9-page report, the 15-minute audio analysis, and tips moving forward.